Hello out there, it's Illuminastic. Welcome to the Law of Attraction live stream for Metaphysical Fridays. This is a topic that I hesitated to even give energy to. I've gotten some negative comments about how some of my content seems New-Agey in the past. And while we're on the subject, I actually gave that some thought. And it was actually triggered by an interview I saw with Maynard James Keenan, the lead singer from Tool. And it was a very old interview, and he was mentioning how when people first start to expand their consciousness and to wake up, they'll notice that when they're in certain moods or thinking about certain subjects, they'll look at the clock and it'll be 1:11, and they'll mention the same thing again and they'll realize it's 1:11. And I had those experiences myself long before I ever heard Maynard James Keenan talk about it. And that is the case with a lot of the experiences that I relate in these videos. I was not aware of the pop culture phenomena at the time that I experienced this stuff. So for me, that was kind of a validation. And I can totally understand why people are skeptical when things become, pop culture spiritual trends. And I think it's also kind of unfortunate because I think once the idea is already in your mind, you can't really be sure if there's some projection going on when you have these experiences. So what I'm saying is that I think in the early stages, there are consistent experiences that people have. And that's why some of these ideas like 11:11 synchronicities and the law of attraction become so popular. The problem with something like the law of attraction is that there's a lot of money in telling people what they want to hear. So, obviously I believe that the law of attraction is a thing, or I wouldn't make this video. It's definitely not a debunking video. But I've done a lot of research into some of the proofs, for example, of the relationship between consciousness and subatomic particles. And in some cases, I was surprised to find that the presentation of the evidence, for example, the movie What the Bleep, they misconstrued a lot of it in order to create a more marketable idea. And so I decided to kind of look deeper and see from a standpoint of physics, is there anything really solid? And we're not going to get into that yet, but we will tonight. And I actually did find something much more compelling that it's repeatable. It's been, Sigma 5 is like the highest ranking for following scientific protocol. And they received that from, Harvard or something. And so definitely credible. So I think if anything, this idea gets exaggerated and misrepresented a lot. Another element of it that I don't think people give a lot of attention to is that there is some danger in engaging with these more advanced mechanisms of consciousness. You can get yourself into a considerable amount of trouble. And, the old warnings about messing around with the occult and finding yourself insane, or there are reasons for that. And I think what's happening in our world right now is that people are waking up out of necessity because we're going to destroy ourselves otherwise. The problem with that is that in, say, indigenous cultures and in the mystery schools, there were initiations and there was someone to check a person that was going through these processes. And we as Westerners have devolved the office of the shaman in our society. And so if you combine that with the fact that there has been a commercial influence, that it's profitable to make these ideas sound as good as you can and sell them to people, has sort of further polluted the energy of these kind of concepts. So the fundamental idea behind it is based usually, at least in terms of scientific proofs, on the double slit experiment. And sort of long story short, I guess the photons were fired at slits in a metal plate, and there's a photo electromagnetic plate that makes a recording of the pattern, and it yielded different results. And the conclusion that people jump to, because ultimately they determine that taking the measurement is what causes the particle to go from a non-determinate state to make a decision and be somewhere in something. So the movie What the Bleep, for example, took away from this that consciousness, that this was proof that consciousness affects subatomic particles. The reality is that it's proof that taking a measurement, the camera was not necessarily conscious, right? So that's kind of an example of the way I think these things get misrepresented. And again, it's not that I'm questioning the premise. I just think that it's going to be a more powerful tool if we have a realistic and holistic understanding of what it actually is. And so far, although consciousness has pretty much with certainty been established to have an influence on particles, it's very, very tiny. So the idea that you can just fill your bank account up using thoughts is probably ridiculous. And, this idea is often marketed that way. So what is important is that if you do succeed in expanding your consciousness, you develop these manifestation powers. If you do not have the discipline and willpower to manage this new intensity of experience, it often, as was the case with me a number of times, it often turns out that you're not really equipped to deal with whatever it is that you've manifested. In one of his books, Israel Regardie, who is a great occultist, advised that magicians get psychotherapy before they start to try to engage in these kind of manifestation practices because of that fact. And for me, I'll give you an example. I had a self-sabotaging neuronet. It was a complex that would manifest every single time. It's as reliable as any other kind of cause and effect. It's just gonna happen if you have a bad neuronet. And so even though I had discovered that I had the capacity to manifest seemingly impossible, definitely highly improbable situations with a lot of specificity over and over again, I would always destroy them at the critical moment. So it's absolutely essential that before you start to really focus on manifesting the reality that you're looking for, you have to go through some kind of process to resolve trauma and to probably most importantly, discover your true will. And I think that this also sort of ensures that you're going to have success with the law of attraction. Because if you are acting in accordance with the deepest part of yourself, you are going to be a better citizen. You're going to be the best version of yourself. So discovery of the true will and an absolute commitment to designing your life in accordance with it, so that the way that you make money, all of your hobbies, everything you do is an expression of this internal essence. And I think that another level of reinforcement that you can access is that if your individual will is in harmony with the collective will, whether you think of that as the collective will of the human population or of the universal mind, if your will is in homeostasis with that, then you have the support of the entire network, the neuronet of consciousness. And that's been my experience, that when I am acting in accordance with what I know to be my true will, and that will is also in alignment with the greater will or the greater good or the collective mind, then you have a tremendous amount of power when it comes to this kind of thing. So I wanted to relate a couple of stories so that you guys have an idea of how it is that I came to accept that this sort of idea could be real. The first one that I'll share is that I'm a musician, and one day I was just talking to my ex-wife in our kitchen, and there was this band, Dark Star Orchestra. They're still around, and they were famous for being like the world's greatest Grateful Dead tribute act. And I was a big fan of theirs. So I said it would be amazing if these guys would have like a school where you could go and just learn from them directly how this music works, you know. And like 10 days later, she hands me her phone and it says Dark Star Orchestra High School. And it's like this like 14-day retreat where you go and study the music with them. And it was even better than I had conceived of it because, you know, the backup singer from the actual Grateful Dead was there, one of the keyboard players. And it was just so absurd that this random thing right after I conceived of it would materialize in that way. And the other story that I'll share that's probably the craziest one, very, very specific. I had just bought a BMW X5, and I didn't really have all the money even for the down payment, but I was in Northern California where everyone's an outlaw. And so I went to this car dealership, and that was the car that I wanted, and I didn't have enough for the down payment. And so I go in the office with the guy, and he's like, so what's your address? And I'm like, oh, I don't have one. He's like, your bank account, or where's your bank? And I'm like, I don't have one. And bad credit, and just, you know, it's like, there's no way this guy's going to do anything. So he says, okay, well, you're going to pay us. And he just gives me this look, you know, and hands me the keys. So he's like, I need you to bring the rest of the deposit very, very soon. So, you know, he gave me 5 days or something. So break up with my girlfriend. A job falls through that would have paid for the rest of the car. So I decide that I'm going to go down to Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco and try to busk to at least make money to eat. I think I had a half a tank of gas and like $3 or something. And so as I'm walking out to Haight-Ashbury, or the Haight to go and play, I have this very specific thought. Hopefully there's still someone from that era, because, you know, was the street where the Grateful Dead and Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix, they all like lived there. And it's where the hippie movement really started. So I thought maybe there's some holdover from that era that's like really connected and he'll do something to help you. And then the next thought I had was, you're an idiot. You're going to make $10 and hopefully get a hamburger, you know? So I go out and I'm playing for a while, and sure enough, I make no money. And at one point, this really tall hippie with this long white beard walks by, and I noticed him, but he didn't give me any money or anything, you know, and he just was gone. And then I started feeling really doomed, I guess would be a good word. And so I stopped playing and leaned against the wall, and I was like, man, where am I going to get $1,000? So this was the exact amount of money that I had decided that I needed to manifest out of nowhere. And I'm playing my guitar on the street. There's maybe $3.30 or something in the case. And so the old hippie guy walks back up right as I have that thought and I'm about to strum my guitar again. And he says, can I pay you $1,000 for 15 minutes of your time? And I was just like, sure, you know, I mean, but what? I mean, there was nobody out there, you know, it was like this guy and like 2 or 3 other people. It was like dead as hell. The one guy that's out there happens to just offer me $1,000, which is exactly the amount of money I need. And then remember the part about how I was thinking somebody from that era that would have some connections or whatever. We go back to the guy's apartment, and he starts telling me that he knows Bob Dylan's ex-wife and that she's looking for a guitarist, and he thought I would be perfect. And that's why he gave me the money to get my attention so I would take him seriously. And a whole lot of other craziness came out of this situation with this guy. I guess he introduced George Harrison to his wife and just had this incredibly crazy history. So not only did I get the money, exactly the guy, and he literally had lived in that apartment since like 1972 or something. Right? They hated him because he was grandfathered in at whatever that cost. I'm pretty sure. So I can't just dismiss all that as coincidence. You know, it's just too absurd. Oh, and by the way, we actually did, Enrica, my partner, and I ended up staying with Bob Dylan's ex-wife, Ruth, like 2 years ago. Finally, we were stranded in LA, and I just thought I should call the guy, the old hippie guy, and ask him if we could stay at Ruth's house. And I thought, this is so dumb. And we were like leaving a Dead show, and the phone rings, or I got a text, and there's an address and a phone number. And so we actually ended up staying there for a few weeks. So, those two examples are pretty compelling to me. Another element I think about this that is important to consider is the things that we don't directly manifest, that just happen, but are still a manifestation of the consciousness and the interplay of that consciousness. The number of times that I have been in just impossible circumstances, and the thing that I needed would just appear. It's happened so many times that it's impossible for me to really doubt that it's because something is supporting me. And what I was saying about the true will earlier, I think that it only does that when I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So one of the warnings I was going to offer is that when you start to experience these things, as I did, it can go to your head. One of the ways that it's been expressed is that the most common mistake that a magician makes is to think that his magic can do more for him than it can. And in this context, we're defining magic as the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will, right? So every conscious act is a magical act. It's any time consciousness produces an effect. And so when you experience also precognitions and other types of ESP type phenomena, increasingly, it can be difficult to discern between legitimate impulses and not, and also to just assume, well, I can manifest anything because I'm just that powerful and that evolved, and it always happens. And then you take a big chance and it doesn't. And this has happened to me. And the whole time, though, one other bit of advice I can give you is that you know that it's not actually the right thing, but you might still pursue it. That was always the case for myself. Also, I think it's worthy of consideration that in the mystery schools and in some other traditions, any magical act that, other than trying to establish knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel or to connect with the higher self, is an act of black magic. Anytime you are using consciousness to try to influence a result, some schools of thought consider that black magic. Personally, I don't. I think that there are reasons to consider the negative consequences of extending your capacity to manifest before you have mastered yourself. It will not do you any good. Trust me, it will not do you any good. You have to do the internal work and spiritual development and really commit to it, because you can get the keys before you know how to drive, and all you're going to do is wreck into a tree, right? So, and that is, fundamentally practices of meditation, and meditating on your decisions also, and making a mental map of, for me, when I have a very strong and correct intuition, I have a very specific physical feeling. And so I make a mental note of that. And if I'm on the fence about something, it's one way to kind of check your resonance in regards to this idea. And, if you're proficient at meditation and creating stillness so that you can focus on a specific element of the frequency of your being at that moment. Open to everything and attached to nothing. I could give you guys another illustration, I guess. And well, also we should talk a little bit about formula, because these things are constrained by natural law. One of the reasons that people get so disappointed and frustrated with magic and prayer not getting any response is that they are asking for things that have no conduits to manifest. If your will is to manifest a book, you're still going to have to constrain printers and know the incantations, the language that you wish to communicate to those who you wish to understand you. The process still has to be the mundane work. You have to set up the conditions. Another way that this has been expressed is that the magician does not try to work with cold ingredients he doesn't have for his cauldron. For me right now in Ecuador, there are certain things I'm just cut off from. So I wouldn't put energy into trying to influence those elements, because I know there's no realistic mechanisms of manifestation for, those things that I might need. So we have to remember that, you're only going to achieve things that are possible. And I think the bigger and more complex the idea, it seems to me that it takes time for it to develop, which when I destroyed some of the things that I created, that was really hard, because I understood how this worked. And I realized that I had been building this charge of conscious energy, and the universe had probably been very slowly and meticulously ordering, the energy in the future, or however it works. And so I knew I wasn't going to just, do it again overnight. And that's something I think to take into consideration, that partly so you don't get frustrated, so that you have realistic expectations. But I think that this stuff often takes a lot more time than people who are marketing it might suggest. Not always. I've been stunned senseless in the past, but I'll give you an example of that sort of experience. As I've said, I was a musician, and I was in a small town in Colorado, and I needed a very specific skill set for all of the musicians in this band. And they were styles that weren't necessarily the kind of antinomous even. So it was difficult to find people that were familiar with both. And I also knew that in order to launch a band like any other business, you needed money. And so I was also single, and I had just started to really believe that consciousness had this influence. So I started consciously trying to do it. I was like, okay, laying in bed one night, where am I going to get this band from? And within a few days, I discovered the universe had already surrounded me with them, and I just didn't know it. My business partner's son was a prodigy jazz and math metal drummer, which was pretty much exactly what I needed. And this guy that was my best friend that I worked with, he could sing like Maynard from Tool. And so, it was already there. And that was just incredibly weird. And it wasn't just that they were there. I mean, me and this kid, when I went to audition, we played just improvised, and it sounded like we had our telepathic connection was ridiculous. I think we jammed straight for an hour and a half or something the first time that we played together. And so it also had this element of seeming like it had this destiny, or it was just, there was no way. It was just like a fluke that this had happened. And so I thought, well, now all I need is it was a lot of years ago. So I said a 22-year-old blonde, very specific description, from a very wealthy family that doesn't mind throwing some money at my band. And we were engaged within a month or something. And before it was over, her mother actually did offer, without provocation, to give me money for my musical career, which, as I was speaking about the necessity of resolving these traumas and getting rid of these bad neural nets, I completely just destroyed that situation out of ego and the assumption that I could just manifest it again. The band basically called me out on something one day, and I just fired them because I just thought, well, I manifested this, I'll manifest another one. Who cares, And I honestly believe I was punished a bit for that as well. I dropped a rock on my finger a couple of days later, it ripped off the end, and I couldn't play guitar for a year, which led to depression. And I had a addiction to painkillers from a long-term illness. I resumed that. I mean, it was just a complete disaster when I engaged this thing that I have done my whole life. And also, I think it's important, we carry this idea of guilt, I think, that isn't really realistic. It's something I think that we've picked up from the religious influence, at least in the States, from Christianity. Every time I would get this incredible gift from the universe and then destroy it, I would think there's no way I'm going to get another chance. This is never going to happen again. It doesn't work like that. You don't deserve it. And then again, through a series of incredibly improbable, just insane sequence of events, I would find myself against all odds, totally outfitted to try again. And this is still happening to this day. The last situation I didn't really destroy. There was a tragedy and I just left. But that is still a possibility in the States to pick up where I left off with that. So I guess it's worthy of mention the next time that came together, because I needed a new band, right? I went out to California with this wife after I fired them, and I needed another band. So eventually a guy that I knew, he was a drummer. He knew this guy. He showed me a video, and it was like the most incredible bass playing I'd ever seen. And I thought, there's no way this guy's going to come and play with us, you know. And the guy ended up wrecking his car and needed a place to stay. So within a week, he's living with us, and we had no gear. People just started bringing stuff over, and I asked Ivan if he had asked for any of it, and he said that he didn't. But we had no PA. A friend of ours just showed up, and he's like, "Hey, I need a place to store this. You guys can use it if you want to." And it was like giant, you know, state of the art. And so we're like, okay, well, we need speaker cabinets. Somebody else needs to store some massive speakers at our house, and microphones. I don't even know. We didn't buy anything. It just literally just appeared from people that weren't even asked to bring it. A guy gave us a guitar, a Zach Wilde Gibson or Epiphone, and then our PA blows up, right? So now we can't rehearse. We have this big gig coming up. The neighbor from up the hill just, I mean, he knows we're a band at this point, but he didn't know our PA exploded. The next day, he randomly shows up and he's like, "Hey, I thought you guys could maybe use a PA head." And it was just constantly like this. I'm not going to get into all the details of the story because I already made a video, The Skeleton Man, I think it's called, or A Message from the Spirit World. I mean, it got way weirder than this. Also, it reminds me of, I can illustrate how the universe will support you, because the situation where I was living with this band, there was supposed to be work at the ranch in order to pay the guys that were working for me. Turned out not to be true. So we had no income all of a sudden, and I had to take care of a business, and we're trying to build this band, and I'm trying to make it all happen at once. And we're running out of money constantly. And every single time it got to the point, and this is what happened every week. You know, I was like feeding literally all and it wasn't just the band. There were people that would come and just flop there. And, you know, I didn't really mind as long as I could keep up with everything. But man, overhead was crazy. And it was like, there's no way we're going to keep up with this, you know? So then one of them, the same neighbor that brought the PA head, comes down one day and he's like, "Hey, I got all this weed that needs to be trimmed," you know? And we're like, "Okay, get to work, everybody," you know? So there was a little bit of income there. And then every time we would get down to the last sandwich or something, I would know. I would start actually seriously. I would think something like the phone is going to ring within 2 hours, and it'll be some kind of whatever we need to get. And I didn't even worry after, you know, the first like 2 or 3 months, because I just knew that something always happened. Like it would find a way to support us. So I guess the bullet point of this presentation is that, yes, I'm quite confident that our consciousness has capacities that we are just now coming to understand. And I think that as a community, collectively, actually, I didn't say anything about plant medicine and psychedelics. As far as healing your traumas goes and repatterning neuronets, The science is there. Ayahuasca will cleanse you of emotional trauma like nothing known to man. I mean, I had a lot of damage. Okay. Ayahuasca will get rid of that. And so the self-sabotaging kind of, if you feel like you don't deserve something, which was fundamentally at the root of my issues, at least in terms of destroying what I received, right? Neutralizing these tendencies emotionally, and also using substances like LSD that increase neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, you can rewire neuronets much more rapidly. People are able to cure lifelong addictions in a single session, and this is happening consistently. So I just wanted to mention that, with caution and respect, those are tools as well that you can use to prime yourself for this kind of endeavor. So you must heal your traumas. You must develop your discipline and willpower. You must know why you're doing what you're doing. If you're just trying to manifest money because you just want a material thing, then hopefully that doesn't happen, because that's not really what you need. If you are a person that understands that we are all avatars of the consciousness that created the universe, and you want to drive a Lamborghini because you actually appreciate that level of human innovation and artistry, and that's why you want to drive that car, it's a different story. So you have to know your purpose, have a purpose, align every breath, if you can, every thought, every deed, to be consistent with that purpose. And this probably will be the case with everyone, I would hope, although I think the left-hand path is there for a reason. That's a discussion for another time. But I think for those of you watching this video right now, it's probably a given that you will discover that this purpose, this deeper purpose, is constrained to the will of the universal mind. In other words, you will be able to sustain yourself. You will be able to live your highest expression of your being, and do it in a way that not only doesn't harm, but benefits the rest of the collective. And that is the real value in these experiences. That is the only acceptable usage of these tools. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope that was helpful. We'll see you again soon.